This is Melanie Klein's first discussion on technique with a small group of analysts in London.
A number of questions put to me. Looking at it, they look to me very much like an exam paper. But I got over it. The first question is, could I say something about the changes that have taken place in technique during the last 40 years? I'm afraid it's a mouthful if I'm going to answer that. I shall try. When I started work, and any of you who have read the first paper in the New Direction, has a little survey of how I started work, and which principles I did not follow and which principles I did follow. Now, at that time, child analysis was still very much in the air. There had been some work been done by Helmut, but really very little, since he made a particular point of not interpreting, and she used play material or drawings, but it didn't develop into a technique. The approach to children was therefore something quite novel, really. But there were some definite principles established. I would say against child analysis, more or less. And it was that you should not interpret. And if you did interpret, of course you shouldn't go very deep, because it was in general, more or less, the attitude for psychoanalytic interpretation. This applied to adults and would, of course, have been thought to apply still more to children. The play technique was, as I said, practiced perhaps by Ruth Helmut, but not worked out. And from the beginning, I found that my beginning was in 1919. I found that the first thing to consider in approaching the child are his anxieties. So that I sat around from the beginning, and when I'm asked why, I couldn't give an answer to that. So I did interpret wherever I found anxiety, and of course I did not stick at all to the idea that I should not interpret too much, that I should not interpret too deep, because I really hardly took any notice of that. I must add that I wasn't aware that in doing so I was actually already thought to be a rebel. But it took me years until I found that out that I was a rebel. I didn't know that I was one. There were quite a number of points to be mentioned, which have to do also with adult techniques. I've already said that this idea about not interpreting much and not going too deep was the approach to the adult. It is difficult to say where the concept of the classic technique came from, because there was such a thing in the air. Years and years afterwards, and I think even now, you might still hear about the classic technique. Well, I know of quite a distinguished analyst in Berlin who said at the time that sometimes months passed in which he wasn't saying a word. So that was definitely an attitude which I don't think was shared neither by Freud nor by Abraham. I have good reasons to think it wasn't shared by Freud either, and I definitely know it was not shared by Abraham. But if I compare the interpretations of today, these interpretations given even at the time by Abraham, there are much more interpretations given, and much more. What is mostly important is they go deeper. They establish the connections more with the unconscious. Well, of course, today too, we are first looking at whatever we can see consciously and start by that. But It is a very different thing, you know, in which we draw our conclusions from the transference situation, are thereby enabled really to go to the depth. The transference situation did not at the time play a very great role. It varied, of course, with analysts. I think it played a greater role with Abraham than with any of the others. But even then, it was in no way comparable to what we are doing now. Let's not forget that this was the beginnings of technique, still in 1920, 21, and by the way, I have to speak about the last 40 years, well, that's nearly the same. That was technique only made its way. Anybody who has read case histories of Freud will see what interesting technique he used. But then one can also see by comparison how different it is from present-day technique. Transference was, of course, as we know, Freud's discovery, that it was not used in the way in which we would now go from what we see in the current situation to a deeper one. That is all altered. Therefore, one could say the changes in technique are fundamental and really imply a different approach. The two things are interlinked. It is only when I really believe, when the approach focuses on anxiety, on emotions, particularly on anxiety, that this technique could be developed. Now, it is well known to you that there are still very great differences of opinion, differences of technique nowadays, but I can only really speak of the one which I and a great number of my colleagues are using, and these imply that both the unconscious, that is a very important point, the unconscious and the transference situation are from the beginning much more considered. Now, we know that every beginner has got trouble over that. The question arises, what, when and how and should he interpret, not too much, not too little, should he already bring the unconscious in? It's awfully difficult to draw a rule about that. I know that from the beginning, I was convinced that I should give transference interpretation in every hour. And even looking back to my first efforts, I would say that I've always done that. Of course, I made my way by seeing that the effect. Anxiety was diminished, the situation was differently established, and this led by and by to a greater understanding how in the transference feelings and transference relations are deflected, and that we should catch them from where they went to, back to the analyst. That is a development which of course didn't happen at once, but by and by. But I would say that, I would say that from about 1926 onwards, in my own technique, there have not been fundamental changes. The approach to anxiety was there from the beginning, the transference too, but there were of course developments in which the way in which unconscious would come in and would be considered developed more. At present, we find ourselves, at least by a number of analysts, using a technique which is extremely different from the one which was used in the 1920s. There is a good deal more one could say, one could go into many details, but then there is the danger that one talks about different types of techniques, and that is awfully difficult, because we know that of course technique is a very variable thing, variable, I would say with each analyst, even with those who use the same principle. No, one can never be sure that two analysts would at the same moment have given the same interpretation. It is already a great deal to say that two analysts working on the same principle would probably have put in one section the same types or the same, even the same interpretation, not necessarily in the same order. Therefore, it is very difficult to establish a rule about that. Now, the comparison with other techniques appear, but that is an invidious topic with which I cannot deal, because I have found that it's extremely difficult to judge somebody else's technique. And some of the differences are well known to you. The emphasis on the unconscious, the emphasis on the transference are the distinguishing features, I would say. I've never been able to give an absolute recipe how one does it. It's much easier to do that in supervision, because then one can, of course, judge what the colleague has done, what one thinks he could have improved on, and by a picture of the technique which one would use, develop. I think at the moment we shall leave it at that, because there may be some more detailed questions which we might take it. There's one point perhaps which I want to mention, and that is the moment in which the transference interpretation comes in. And here I find that is really individually different. As I said, analysts using the same principles, the same approach, would probably all agree that the transference has to come in, but has it to come in straight away? I remember a seminar where a very well-meaning candidate was constantly horrified about my not using the transference interpretation sufficiently. And so that I would in every sentence, in every word, bring the transference in. Well, I tried to explain that that is not really the whole story. So if we take even the beginning of an analysis, we would of course watch carefully how the transference comes in. But the patient might have a lot to tell us about his history, about his experience, about his present troubles. And that may happen at any time in the analysis. When that happens, one should of course give the patient full rope to do that, and not necessarily at once come in with the transference. The moment in which it has to come in is therefore very difficult to say, and is really a matter of contact between the patient and the analyst, or rather the analyst and the patient. When one feels now is the moment where it has to come in, then one has to give it. Now that is very, very general, but I don't really see how I could make it more specific. One can commit a great mistake by trying to at once to come with the transference if a patient is full of some troubles which he has just experienced, or some troubles which have been revived, which he wants to talk about what happened really in the past, what he suffers from. It would be a great mistake then not to give him the full possibility of expressing himself. One keeps at the back of one's mind all the time how that relates to the analyst. One also keeps at the back of one's mind what the unconscious meaning of all that is. But one has to choose the right moment to bring both these factors in.
Can we interrupt this now? Will it break your thought if we do?
No, I have lost my thought about it anyhow. No.
I'm really thinking of a special case I'm thinking too about supervising students, and I find myself quite frequently telling them that what in fact they are in the transference at that moment is the analyst. And I'm wondering, I'm really thinking of the same point as you are, that sometimes what the patient is really doing is showing one a situation then, and that in a way, if one tries to interpret something else in the transference, one is in fact breaking what is almost the transference then, that the patient is really treating you as an analyst and showing you a situation. And with these students, I find that they're inclined to say the patient's talking about their mother, to assume they are the patient's mother, when in fact it may be something quite different.
I think I'd like to understand a bit better.
But sometimes it seems very clear that the patient has quite a realistic appreciation of what the analyst in fact is, and what the analyst's role is. That there are times in fact when one isn't anybody else in the transference at all, but actually the analyst. And that the patient is using you as a kind of somebody to whom they bring their material.
I would quite agree with that. I mean, if even, that is quite true, that particular patients are not so evil, particularly patients who are studying and want to learn, are also very much keeping in mind they are speaking to the analyst, and that this is the person who is going to understand them and to help them, and that they can either learn themselves or gain knowledge from. But that is true, and I think I would allow for that. But when they do that, what is the prototype?
Oh, quite. I'm thinking one does work from that background, and what sort of a role do they put you in? But at the moment, I think I'm still following your point. You interrupt the patient. If you insist on saying you are the patient's mother or father or something like that.
Yes, that is quite true. Because then he is probably very much involved with his troubles or experiences of the past and wants to report that, or even some current experience. But you do keep in mind that when he turns to the analyst as a helpful person, because that is of course what you mean, I take it. If he turns as a helpful person, there is a prototype.
Oh yes, there is a special sort of demands made and so on.
Yes, that it's a helpful mother to whom he turns, or a helpful father. Are there any other questions about that? At the end, it's either that it be one by one.
I suggest that anyone wants to talk and put their hand up, then I'll say their name so we do get it.
Shall we leave for the moment and go on to the next one? Now, what are the principles that should govern the conduct of a preliminary interview? That is what depends on circumstances. A medical person who sees a patient is in a different position than I had usually been if a patient was sent to me and had already been seen by somebody. Sometimes, of course, it isn't so easy. I remember an interview where a medical colleague of mine had seen the patient and had highly recommended me. But there was no question whatever, therefore, that he would accept me. He was most dubious, and that particular recommendation had made him more suspicious than anything else. So, in that case, the interview had an entirely different coloring than it would have in another case, where I would usually have really tried to arrange to see for myself, first of all, that I want to accept this patient, and then discuss details of times, of fees, of something like that. Now, of course, a medical colleague who would see the patient first, who turns to him, would take more or less his history and would go into details and to hear about his symptoms. Personally, I've always been very much relieved when I need not do that, because I found that it is so much more easy to start analysis soon. But that must vary according to these differences, to these various situations. That particular patient whom I mentioned, that turned out to be a very difficult patient indeed, complained bitterly that now he's coming to me because somebody else is sent him. Now he had asked somebody else's advice, but there was no logic in that. The point was still that he resented that he hadn't, as it were, chosen me himself, that somebody else had interfered, that somebody else had already come between him and me. In that particular interview, I gave quite a number of interpretations. I did really suggest to him that we cannot only consider that on rational grounds, because after all he had asked the wife, but obviously from the rational angle impossible for him to choose me before he knew me, but that the feelings that he might have, the feelings that he was never entirely allowed to choose his own mother, that he never was allowed to be alone with her without the father having a say in the matter, might interfere. There were quite a few. There was a long interview in which I had on the spot to give interpretations. The result was that he came. It turned out to be an interesting but very difficult situation. But, therefore it is not easy to say what one would do in the first interview. If you are medical, of course you would have. And if the patient comes to you so that you can decide what his state of mind is about, anyhow, you take probably history. The analyst who is in another position, as I was, doesn't take history. I never went into that. Of course, one can never stop a patient to begin to talk about that. That is another matter. I had such first interviews where the patient just would begin to talk about his troubles. And in that case, I didn't interrupt. I just listened and suggested that we are going to deal with that perhaps a little later. But you can see that the situation is quite different with a medical and non-medical analyst. And also possibly according to the patient and the situation which comes about. Like so many things in analysis, you cannot make a hard and fast rule. A patient who would feel on the spot, even assuming now that somebody was speaking from that angle, that somebody was sent to me, if I had the feeling that the patient feels the best, if I don't listen to him, I would listen. In other cases where he was determined to come to me, that happened with clinic patients or with other patients, I would not go into details of history or troubles and so on, but it has to vary according to the situation, according to the patient. And so, like so many things in psychoanalysis, it is a matter of finding feelings one's way for a patient. There are quite a number of things which one can teach in technique. There are quite a number of things which one cannot teach. That sounds discouraging, but it's a fact. A feeling, how the other person feels, is something which I think is a precondition for making different energies. There are quite a number of other points as well which are needed, but that is one of them. It is also in ordinary life, as we know, important to see what the other person feels and to go into the relation develops accordingly. It doesn't only apply to analysis, but it's a precondition in analysis. Experience is a great help in that. I don't think one is simply born and as an analyst one starts from first patient equipped with few things which I'm telling you. That is not true. But some of it is true, and that has a good deal to do with the prospect of helping somebody to become a good analyst or not. It isn't only technique we are teaching. There's quite a lot more it should come in, and if you really can help the analyst to find his way towards the patient's feelings, even when we come to that later on in the question of silences, then we have taught him a lot. Because that too can be developed up to a point. But only up to a point somebody has to be there. Now I have a very, very difficult question here, and I don't even know whether I can do anything with it. And that is, what are my views as to how one should deal with the patient's silences? Now, it's hardly possible to say what one is to do with that, because it entirely varies according to the kind of silence, to the patient, to the preceding material, to the whole analytic situation, how far it has been established, and again to feeling quite definitely that the silence has such and such a meaning. Now nobody is omniscient, and therefore one can't be sure that one is getting the right content of the silence. But if there are a few factors together which help one, as I said, the material of the preceding session, something which we know already about the patient's attitude, the whole situation in which the patient is in. I mean, all that is a help towards knowing, is that now a stubborn silence? Is that a silence by which he says, I don't want to have anything to do with you? Is that a silence into which despair enters? I know that whatever I shall say, I can never unload myself, there's so much trouble in me. Is it despair that the analyst might never help him or her? You can already see that according to these various possibilities, there are various ways of dealing with that. Generally speaking, I don't think that one should get, the first thing, of course, is that the analyst shouldn't get too anxious when the patient is silent. It starts with that. The patient feels that at once, nor should he be resentful. I've heard this from a case long back in Berlin, that the patient wouldn't speak and the analyst would pick up a newspaper and read. Well, I can't advocate that. I mean, if the analyst gets cross and frustrated and annoyed because the patient, instead of explaining everything what he wants to hear, is silent, then the situation is already take it the wrong way. First of all, he should really try to understand why the patient is silent. He should also give him an opportunity to be for a few minutes silent. I see no particular reason for that. Why not? As time goes on, one might find out what it might mean why a patient has to have a few minutes before he can begin. It varies, but there is something in the attitude of in the patient which makes it difficult for him to begin at all, and then we have already used that he might start in a session with being silent for a few minutes. Now, according to whether this is a silence which I said is an expression of despair, an expression very important of distrust and of suspicion, according to interpretation would after some minutes go. I mean, sometimes one can solve the situation by a very simple question, what are you thinking? It is possible then that we come in time to see why it is necessary for the patient that we should first say, what are you thinking? Because after all, he knows quite well that they're interested in that. So there must be something in his need to make me put that question to him. But I don't think there's any harm to put that question and to find out by and by why that is so necessary, and to be able to take this into the interpretation not on the spot, but in the whole context. He must be encouraged, he must see that I am really wishing for him to speak. He must perhaps even hear the tone of my voice. He must find out that I am still the same person as I was yesterday. He may even test me that I am not getting cross when he is not speaking. So all that can enter, and I feel that if we can easily get over that by saying what are you thinking or what is in your mind, then we shall in time get to understand what it means that he repeats that. If it is a repetitive thing, if nearly every hour starts like that, then a silence is dictated by suspicion, and that is a situation in which we come again and again across, particularly in adolescence. Then I think it is always a young child. Then, of course, a young child we don't expect to speak, but we expect to do something. if a child doesn't move, doesn't give any sign of neither speaking nor saying nor anything, then I would say that my first guess would be that he's frightened of me. And I would interpret that I'm a strange. I've often given these instances and there with my psychoanalysis of children, that the suspicion of me, of somebody who tries to find out his source, is important. But that would be one of the emotional situations which we are led to more or less by our feeling our way towards it. As I said, there could be and often is a feeling in which the patient is in despair and feels no word to help. Then this, what are you thinking now, might sometimes be the beginning to think, oh, I can't say it all because it's so awful or something like that. Then we have already a way to it. I know there are patients, of course, who are capable of being silent for half an hour or something like that, and I'm not in favor of waiting all the time. I'm in favor of waiting a few minutes, and it can even be 10 minutes at most, I would say. But then I would really feel that something has to be done. And calling up in my mind what happened in the previous session, and what I already know of the patient, and now speaking not of the beginning of an analysis, is I would give an interpretation of that silence. I find that very often we can really get the patient then to speak and become closer to what was on his mind. There are, of course, other silences, and I think that too is something which is of importance, and that is that feeling in which the patient is absolutely happy to lie on the couch, to be silent, and feel that now here is the place where at last I can lie quietly and will not speak, which is a very different attitude and a very different mood. In that case, we can soon see that what he's really repeating is a situation of, I would say, early happiness. A feeling that here I am, I'm understood, their words are not necessary, I can quite well do without them. Which again means another kind of interpretation than the ones which I suggested. The beginning of an analysis, I really think that it was rarely that one would go wrong by interpreting that it's difficult to begin because he might feel that it's unpleasant to divulge one's thoughts, that I'm after finding out his thoughts, that may arouse suspicion in him, and may also be a situation which in the past he hated, but that very often is a bridge to a patient in the first session beginning to speak. But of course, as I said, it varies so very much. So I really don't know whether I've answered your question.
I think you touched at one point on countertransfers. I wonder how you would like to elaborate on countertransfers as a guide to the understanding and interpretation of silences.
In addition to what you've about put in here,
really in relation to the specific point about silence.
Yes, well, I think if I start with that, then I have altogether to say a little more about countertransference, which has been extremely the fashion in recent years. And at one occasion, I've been called countertransference. Now, it isn't so. You know, of course, that the patient is bound to serve certain feelings in the analyst, and that this is varies according to the patient's attitude, according to the patient. So there are, of course, feelings which occur in the analyst and which he has to become aware of. I have never found that the countertransference has helped me to understand my patient better. If I may put it like that, I have found that it helped me to understand myself better. And that I thought is really, here I'm going back to old times. I remember very well that in Berlin it was the same. if you feel like that about your patient, now go in a corner and think it carefully out what's wrong with you. Now, that is up to find through. If a patient stirs in me a very strong feeling either of anxiety or of premonition, or I don't know, there are 100 possibilities, then I would really be more interested to know why I'm capable of getting into the situation than why the patient raises it. I'm quite aware that there are patients which are whose personality may more appeal to one than somebody else's personality, and that of course makes a difference. But here again one has to be very careful, because what is considered too positive countertransference may be quite as great a mistake as negative countertransference, because then one too has to ask oneself, is one not now influenced by this or that and that? Now that looks like a very studious program which I'm saying here, but I think it happens momentarily. It happens on the spot. At the moment where one feels that anxiety is stirred in one, I think probably again that is a matter of experience. One would on the spot really come to a conclusion what's going on in myself. Therefore I cannot really find, and have never found, that countertransference so unavoidable is to be a guide towards understanding the patient, because I cannot see the logic of that, because it obviously has to do with the state of mind of the analyst, whether he is less or more liable to be put out, to be annoyed, to be disappointed, to get anxious, to dislike somebody strongly, or to like somebody strongly. I mean, that has so much to do with the analyst, that I really feel that my own experience, and that it goes back a very long time that I had felt that, is rather to find out within myself. When I made a mistake, I always did it because I hadn't enough got hold of myself, I would say. I'm not saying that I didn't make mistakes, of course I didn't make mistakes. But I was very much inclined to study those mistakes and to really to find out what had led me to that mistake. And then I really found it was a difficulty myself. Now, that seems too idealistic a situation, because one would say that a patient who will use every opportunity to criticize one, who obviously does grudge me any possibility of helping, so he has come to me to be helped, one would say is an annoying creature. But that is not really the attitude of the analyst towards him. I mean, you may say that I'm putting up here an ideal which one can't comply with. I still feel that if one can get hold of what is in oneself, which is really the difficulty, one is on very much safer ground, and to transfer it because the patient has got in me this and that feeling, from that I draw easier my conclusion about the patient. And that I don't believe. I really think I draw my conclusions from what goes on in the patient by his material, by his emotions, by his moods, by what I see in the patient, and not what he raises with me. It may be that it's impossible really, for I remember there's a saying of Freud, and I've never been able to find it again, that he said he couldn't analyze anybody who was too gemein, mean, of whom he was too contemptuous. I cannot tell you the wording because I have looked for this place and I've never been able to find it again, but I know that he said so, that he doesn't feel that he could do that. Well, that could happen. In that case, I think one should better not analyze the patient. In particular case, in which countertransference can come in as a very anxiety stirring factor, is the strong projective identification of the patient. That applies particularly to very ill patients. Where one feels that they are pushing into one their whole depression, their whole anger, their whole envy, everything they've got, you know. Or, an alternative, they want people that they are eating out of one what they can. Now, all that, of course, is part of the analytic situation. And whereas one has some feelings about it, I really see that if one knows, it becomes clearer that now I see that he pushes it into me. It depends on him if they can push it into me. I mean, there are two of us here. He pushes it into me, but I won't have it pushed into me. I'd rather consider what he's doing, and that is that he's pushing at that moment. It sounds all very perfectionistic, and I don't like that for putting it like that, because I know it needs a great deal of experience, patience, even tolerance to come to that point, and nobody comes to it on the spot. But it's a matter of principle, and that is what I was replying to. What are the uses of countertransference in analysis? There are countertransferences unavoidable, but should be controlled, studied, and used by the analyst for his own benefit, I would say, and not for the benefit of the patient. I don't believe in it. Any other questions about that?
I was wondering, Mrs. Klein, how closely akin are countertransference and the empathy you were earlier mentioning as being a sine qua non of a good analyst?
There's a great deal in what you are saying now, because to be able, really, to accept that, and now I see very mean traits in that patient. I see that he's really out to get everything out of me what he can. That his attitude is really one in which he gets out of people what he can, then turns away and even will perhaps malign them. We get such character difficulties in patients. And what I said of the lead just said has a great deal to do with it, and that is empathy with the patient. I really do not believe that one can do good analytic work with a great deal of sympathy and tolerance and empathy with the patient. If we see such character traits just worked out against ourselves, and instead of feeling, now I can't bear this patient, that proves that he is that, etc. Now, instead of that, if you really feel, well, that is just what I want to study. If he's so greedy, if he's so envious, that is part of his psychology. That's why he came to me. That is what I want to understand. Besides, is there another element, and not only empathy, and that is the wish to know. Now, the wish to know is, I think, a very important thing in being an analyst. The wish to explore the mind, whatever the mind is like. That is another ideal point I'm putting up here, and I would like to take all that with a grain of salt, because I hope I'm not intimidating you by putting forward such high ideals. But up to a point, I think it is really a precondition. It depends on my own feelings, I would even say my own stability. Whether or not he's robbing me gives me the feeling that he's already stolen all my thoughts out of me, or not. Or whether he's the attitude which I can already notice, that he will in the next moment when I felt him say, oh, but I've known this all my life. Shall I get very annoyed about that? Or shall I then think, why has he got this attitude? That when he asks for help and gets help, that he must the next moment feel that he devalues that help. Perhaps is it this attitude up to a point, and not in its ideal aspect, let's say, which helped me to understand better envy. When I found again and again in patients his attitude, that the moment they had help, the next moment they would bring forward something which was the value in what they got at that moment. If I really would have drawn from my own feelings a conclusion that, I don't know really what conclusion, but I drew the conclusion from that is one character trait in that person, and that I want to understand more why he has developed such character traits. Of course, then we also have sometimes, we have to take great account of his history, of the circumstances which increased that. We have to understand that he cannot bear somebody superior to him, and that must have been a very important feature in childhood, that he couldn't bear those adults who always seemed to know better, that he couldn't bear that they were better sometimes than he was. All that is an interesting question for study. Now, that is far from that mirror business, which we know so well, which has so often been used. Again, I'm not quoting the word literally, that the analyst is kind of mirror on which things are reflected, That is not true. The analyst is a study. If you only want to explore the man, that is the question of empathy. If he really also has the feeling, the wish to help, it's amazing how much it adds to patience, tolerance, and the capacity to bear unpleasant things which happen. One of the unpleasant things is our failure. If we find that a session which was interpreted beautifully finishes with the patient leaving us with anxiety and denial, well, then we have a feeling of failure. And even then we must even bear that some patients altogether may be a failure, and they are. They are not always successful. And that is something too.